The autumn breeze carried a crisp scent of decayed leaves and distant fireplaces, a comforting melody that I had grown to appreciate over the years. The town of Maplewood, with its array of quaint houses and tree-lined streets, was the very epitome of tranquility, a place where nothing extraordinary ever happened. It was the quintessential small town, where everyone knew everyone, and secrets were as much a part of the landscape as the trees that lined the avenues. 3 years had passed since the darkest day of my life. My daughter, Lily, had vanished without a trace while playing in the backyard. She was only 7 years old, a bright spark of joy with golden curls and an infectious laugh that could light up the gloomiest day. Despite exhaustive searches, countless flyers, and community vigils, she had vanished. In the end, the case went cold, and I was left with an aching void that no amount of time could fill. Life trudged forward, as it always does. I returned to my routines, working at the local library during the day and spending evenings lost in books or memories. The townspeople were kind, offering sympathetic nods and soft-spoken words of comfort. But the emptiness persisted, a silent companion that clung to every waking moment. It was a cool October evening when the first disturbance to my melancholic normalcy arrived. A knock at the door, soft but deliberate, echoed through the quiet house. Visitors were rare, especially at this hour. I hesitated for a moment, a chill creeping up my spine, before crossing the living room to answer. Standing on the porch, silhouetted against the dim light, was a figure that caused my heart to stutter and my breath to catch. Lily. She stood there, her familiar face a mirror from the past, yet with an unsettling otherness about her. Her eyes, once bright and inquisitive, now bore a depth of sorrow and age that belied her tender years. Her dress, a simple white frock, seemed oddly pristine amidst the falling leaves. "Hello, Mommy," she said, her voice soft yet piercing, sending a shiver down my spine. I was paralyzed by disbelief. How could this be? My mind raced with explanations, each more implausible than the last. But there she was, her presence undeniable, defying the logic of the universe. With trembling hands, I reached out to her, my heart torn between joy and dread. "Lily?" I whispered, my voice barely a breath. She nodded, stepping forward into the light, her small hand slipping into mine. The warmth of her touch was real, yet there was an unsettling coldness that lingered just beneath the surface. I pulled her into a tight embrace, tears streaming down my cheeks, a mixture of relief and fear swirling within me. As the days passed, the town buzzed with disbelief and curiosity. The prodigal daughter had returned, and everyone wanted to know how. But Lily offered no explanations, only vague references to a place she could not describe, a darkness she could not name. Her demeanor was calm, almost too calm, as if she had witnessed things no child should. I tried to resume life as it was, but the shadows of unease loomed ever larger. Lily was different, in ways that were hard to articulate. She had taken to spending long hours alone in her room, staring out the window or drawing strange, intricate patterns that seemed to pulsate with an unseen energy. At night, I would hear her murmuring to herself in a language I did not recognize, her voice carrying a resonance that was both haunting and beautiful. The escalation of these peculiarities came gradually, as if she were testing the boundaries of this world she had returned to. Objects began to move of their own accord, subtle at first, a book sliding across a table, a curtain billowing without wind, then more pronounced. One morning, I awoke to find the walls of her room covered in those same bizarre patterns, etched deep into the plaster as if by an invisible hand. The air around her seemed to hum with a frequency just beyond perception, a vibration that set my teeth on edge. I sought help, reaching out to doctors, psychologists, anyone who might offer an explanation for her strange behaviors. But each visit ended in frustration, the professionals leaving with more questions than answers. They dismissed it as trauma, a coping mechanism for whatever she had endured during her absence. But I knew better. Something unnatural had taken root within her, something that defied the simple explanations of science and reason. My nights were filled with restless dreams, nightmares where Lily's eyes glowed with an unholy light, her voice echoing with a power that bent reality to her will. The climax came on a storm-laden night, when thunder rumbled in the distance like the growl of an ancient beast. I awoke to find Lily standing by my bed, her eyes shining in the darkness, a faint smile playing on her lips. "Come with me, Mommy," she said, her voice carrying a weight that brooked no refusal. She led me outside, the wind whipping around us as if the very elements were conspiring to keep us at bay. We walked through the backyard, past the gnarled oak tree, into the woods where the lights of the town faded into obscurity. My heart pounded with every step, fear and love battling for dominance within me. We reached a clearing where the trees formed a natural circle, their branches arching overhead like cathedral vaults. In the center stood a stone altar, worn and ancient, its surface etched with the same cryptic symbols Lily had drawn. The air was thick with anticipation, charged with an energy that made the hair on my arms stand on end. Lily turned to me, her expression serene, her eyes reflecting the swirling sky above. "This is where I went, Mommy. This is where I saw." "What did you see?" I asked, my voice a mere whisper against the roaring wind. She hesitated, her gaze distant, as if peering into a realm beyond the veil of our world. "Everything and nothing." They showed me the truth. A shiver coursed through me, the enormity of her words settling in my bones. "Who are they, Lily?" Her smile widened, though the warmth never reached her eyes. "The ones who dwell between. They have chosen me." The realization dawned with a chilling clarity. This was not the daughter I had lost, but a vessel for something far older, a harbinger of forces beyond my comprehension. The forest seemed to close in around us, the shadows deepening, as if the world itself were holding its breath. "Join us, Mommy," she said, extending her hand, her voice a siren's call that tugged at the very core of my being. I stood frozen, the weight of the choice before me almost unbearable, to follow her into the depths of the unknown, or to turn away and lose her forever. In that moment, a surge of defiance welled up within me, a refusal to succumb to the darkness that beckoned. "No, Lily," I said, my voice firmer than I felt. "I love you, but I cannot follow." Her expression shifted, a flicker of emotion crossing her features. Disappointment, perhaps, or something deeper. The wind howled around us, and for a moment, I thought I saw a glimmer of the daughter I remembered, her eyes softening with a trace of the innocence she once possessed. "Very well," she said, her voice barely audible over the storm. And then she was gone, the clearing empty save for the whispering trees and the ancient altar. I stood alone in the darkness, the silence pressing in on all sides, the echoes of her presence lingering in the air. The weight of what had transpired settled heavily upon me, a burden that I would carry for the rest of my days. In the aftermath, life in Maplewood resumed its tranquil rhythm, the townsfolk returning to their routines, the mystery of Lily's return fading into the annals of whispered folklore. Yet, the fear lingered, a specter that haunted the peripheries of my consciousness. I had lost her again, in a way more profound than death itself, and the emptiness within me was deeper than before. I knew she was still out there, somewhere between worlds, her presence a constant shadow on the fringes of my reality. And every so often, when the wind howled through the trees and the night air hummed with an otherworldly resonance, I would feel her near, a fleeting touch of warmth that left a chill in its wake. The daughter who had returned, and the daughter I had lost once more. I remember the morning she disappeared. It was a day like any other in our sleepy town, the sky painted in soft pastels of dawn, birds chirping in a gentle serenade. Our neighborhood, a quaint suburb nestled between rolling hills and dense woods, was a place where everyone knew everyone. Life here was predictable, almost comforting in its routine. I woke up to the aroma of freshly brewed coffee, the sound of the morning news murmuring in the background, and the sunlight streaming through the kitchen window as my daughter, Lily, sat across from me, her head buried in a book, a habit she'd inherited from me. Lily was the kind of child who seemed to carry her own light, an inner glow that warmed those around her. She was quiet, introspective, with a vivid imagination that often painted worlds far more colorful than our own. She spoke of these worlds sometimes, as if they were as real to her as our town was to me. Her stories would weave tales of enchanted forests and mystical creatures, making me smile at her creativity. On that morning, she looked up from her book, her eyes sparkling with the mischief of some fantastical adventure she was concocting in her mind. We exchanged our usual goodbyes, a ritual now ingrained in our daily lives, and she set off to school with her backpack slung over one shoulder, her figure growing smaller as she walked down the tree-lined street. I watched her until she turned the corner, disappearing from sight, and then went about my day, the usual humdrum of errands and chores. Only, that evening, she didn't return. It started with phone calls to her friends, followed by visits to her usual haunts, and then the slow, creeping dread as night fell and she was still nowhere to be found. Panic set in, the kind that grips your heart and squeezes until breathing becomes difficult. The police were called, searches were conducted, her face plastered on every lamppost and bulletin board, but it was as if the earth had swallowed her whole. Days stretched into weeks, then months, and eventually, years. The world moved on, as it does, and I was left with the echo of her absence, a void that seemed to grow larger with each passing day. 3 years passed. I had settled into a semblance of normalcy, a new routine that accommodated the perpetual ache of her absence. The house felt emptier, the quietness punctuated only by the occasional creak of the floorboards, as if the house itself mourned her loss. I had learned to live with the uncertainty, the not knowing, though it haunted me like a specter, always lurking in the shadows of my mind. Then one evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of crimson and violet, a knock echoed through the house. It was a soft, tentative sound, almost hesitant. My heart skipped a beat, a flicker of hope sparking to life, painful in its intensity. I opened the door, and there she was. Lily. Her hair was longer, her frame slightly taller, but it was unmistakably her. She stood there, illuminated by the porch light, her expression an unreadable mix of exhaustion and something else. Relief washed over me, a tidal wave of emotion that nearly brought me to my knees. I pulled her into my arms, the reality of her presence almost too much to comprehend. She felt solid, warm, and I could smell the faint scent of pine, as if she had walked through a forest to get here. Questions tumbled from my lips, incoherent and tangled, but she merely shook her head, her voice a soft whisper. "I'm tired, Mom. Can we talk tomorrow?" I nodded, unable to find words, my mind a whirl of confusion and disbelief. I led her inside, my hand gripping hers tightly, afraid that if I let go, she might vanish again. Her room was as she had left it, caught in a time warp, a sanctuary of her childhood filled with books, drawings, and a collection of whimsical trinkets. She lay down on her bed, pulling the covers up to her chin, and I watched her for a while, my heart a tumult of joy and unease. Sleep eluded me the night. I lay awake, listening to the sounds of the house, the wind brushing against the windows, the distant hoot of an owl. My thoughts were a cacophony of questions, the most pressing one echoing in my mind. Where had she been? What had happened to her? The relief of her return was tinged with an undercurrent of dread, an inexplicable feeling that something was amiss. When morning came, the world felt different, as if teetering on the edge of a revelation. Lily joined me at the breakfast table, the same spot where she had sat that last morning. She looked different in the daylight, her eyes darker, shadowed by something I couldn't quite place. There was a silence between us, heavy with unspoken words, and I hesitated, unsure how to breach the chasm that the years had created. "Where did you go, Lily?" I finally asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Her gaze met mine, steady yet distant, as if she were looking through me rather than at me. "To the woods," she replied simply, and I felt a chill slither down my spine. Our town was surrounded by dense forests, sprawling expanses of trees that were both beautiful and foreboding. There were stories, of course, about people getting lost, about places where the air felt thicker, time moving differently. Superstitions that the older folks whispered about when they thought no one was listening. "The woods?" I echoed, trying to keep my voice steady. "But, Lily, for 3 years?" She nodded, her expression unchanged. Time's different there, Mom. I met others, children who'd been lost, like me. They showed me things, taught me about the forest's magic. Her words were like a punch to the gut, the kind that leaves you breathless and reeling. Forest magic. Others, it sounded like one of her childhood stories, only now there was an unsettling sincerity in her voice. What do you mean, magic? I pressed, an unease coiling in my stomach. Her eyes flickered, a brief flash of something sharp, almost predatory. The forest is alive, Mom. It remembers, it watches, it takes care of its own. I tried to process her words, the implications, the sheer impossibility of it all. But before I could ask more, she stood up, moving with a grace that seemed almost unnatural. I'm going to take a walk, she announced, her voice decisive. I wanted to protest, to keep her in sight, afraid that if I let her out of my reach, she'd disappear again. But something in her demeanor stopped me, a quiet authority that was both foreign and familiar. Instead, I nodded numbly, watching as she slipped out the door, a wraith-like figure against the morning light. The hours dragged on, each minute stretching into eternity. I busied myself with mundane tasks, trying to distract my mind from the whirlpool of anxiety and confusion, but my thoughts kept circling back to Lily, to the woods, to the inexplicable. The afternoon shadows lengthened, and still, she did not return. As dusk settled in, a sense of foreboding settled over me. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was brewing, something beyond my understanding. I went to the back porch, peering into the encroaching darkness, my heart a steady drumbeat of worry. That's when I heard it, a low rustling from the tree line, the whisper of leaves caught in the night breeze. At first, I dismissed it as an animal, a deer or perhaps a raccoon, but the sound grew louder, more deliberate, and soon I could make out the outline of a figure emerging from the woods. It was Lily, or at least it looked like her. She moved with an ethereal fluidity, her steps barely disturbing the grass beneath her feet. But as she drew closer, I saw something in her eyes, something that made my blood run cold, a glint of green, unnatural and piercing. Lily? I called, my voice trembling. She paused, the shadows dancing across her face, obscuring her features. Mom, she replied, and there was a lilt to her voice, an echo that seemed to belong to the forest itself. I'm home. I should have been relieved, but instead, a primal instinct screamed at me to run, to get away. There was something not right about her, an aura that felt ancient and unknowable, as if the forest had imprinted itself onto her very being. What happened to you? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She smiled, a slow, enigmatic curve of the lips. The woods took care of me, showed me who I truly am. I belong to them now. Her words hung between us, an invocation of something I couldn't comprehend. I felt a tear slip down my cheek, the realization settling in that the daughter I had known was gone, replaced by this otherworldly presence. As if sensing my turmoil, she stepped forward, reaching out to cup my face in her hands, her touch cool against my skin. Don't be afraid, Mom. I'm not alone. The others are with me, watching, waiting. I shivered at her words, my mind conjuring images of ghostly children, eyes glinting in the dark, hidden among the trees. The air around us seemed to thicken, charged with an energy that was almost palpable. Lily, please, I begged, though I wasn't sure what I was pleading for. Her to stay, to leave, to return to the child I had lost. But she merely shook her head, her gaze full of a wisdom that belied her years. The forest needs you too, Mom. Come with me. A part of me wanted to refuse, to cling to the safety of my home, the life I knew. But another part, the one that had always been drawn to the woods, curious about its mysteries, felt a pull, a siren's call that was impossible to resist. I hesitated, caught between two worlds, the familiar and the unknown. And as I stood there, the forest seemed to lean in, its shadows stretching towards me, inviting, beckoning. With a deep breath, I took a tentative step forward, my heart a wild cacophony in my chest. Lily's smile widened, her eyes shining with an otherworldly light, and I knew without a doubt, that my life was about to change irrevocably. As I crossed into the tree line, the world shifted, the air humming with a symphony of whispers, leaves rustling in a language I couldn't understand. The forest enveloped me, a living, breathing entity, and I felt an inexplicable kinship, a sense of belonging that had eluded me for so long. Behind me, the house stood silent, a relic of a life I was leaving behind, and ahead lay the unknown, a path shrouded in mystery and promise. Lily took my hand, her grip steady and reassuring, and together we walked deeper into the forest, embraced by the night. The fear of the unknown was still there, a whisper at the back of my mind, but it was tempered by something else, a sense of wonder, a curiosity about the world my daughter had discovered. As we moved further into the shadows, I realized that this was only the beginning, a journey into the heart of the forest, where magic and reality intertwined, and the possibilities were endless. And though I didn't know what lay ahead, I found comfort in the knowledge that I wasn't alone. For Lily was with me, and the forest, with all its secrets and enchantments, was now my home too. In the end, the fear lingered, a reminder of the life I had once known, but it was overshadowed by the thrill of the unknown, the allure of a world where the lines between reality and fantasy blurred, and anything was possible. The day had begun like any other, with the humdrum routine of suburban life quietly unfolding around me. Our small town, nestled between the dense woods and the sprawling fields, was a place time seemed to overlook. Its predictable rhythms were a balm to my weary soul, offering a semblance of peace after the chaos that had engulfed my life 3 years prior. A light drizzle tapped against the windows as I sat at the kitchen table, my hands wrapped around a steaming mug of coffee. The smell of rain mingled with the earthy aroma of the beverage, creating a peculiar comfort. It was a Saturday, gardening day, according to the schedule I'd adhered to so religiously since Margaret went missing. The routine was my anchor in the storm, a way to distract my mind from the gnawing emptiness that had followed her disappearance. 3 years. It felt both like a heartbeat and a lifetime since that morning when I kissed her goodbye, watching her skip down the walkway toward school. The image of her receding figure, clad in her favorite yellow raincoat, was etched into my memory with painful clarity. But that same day, the rain had intensified, and with it came the tempest that stole her away from me. Despite exhaustive searches, interviews, and desperate pleas, Margaret remained elusive, like a shadow that flitted just beyond the reach of light. That morning, as I donned my raincoat and prepared to tend to the flower beds, an unexpected knock at the door interrupted my thoughts. I wasn't expecting visitors, and an irrational hope fluttered in my chest, one I immediately quashed. Visitors meant pity, awkward silence, and sympathetic glances I'd grown accustomed to avoiding. But the knocking persisted, insistent and patternless, as if whoever stood on the other side battled an internal conflict. I swung open the door, bracing myself for the neighborly face of sympathy, but what I saw instead left me breathless and grounded in disbelief. There she stood, drenched and shivering, her yellow raincoat darkened by the rain, but unmistakably hers. Margaret. The word lodged in my throat, half choked by the surge of emotions that overtook me. Her eyes, once bright and mischievous, stared back at me, glassy and distant. My heart pounded a frantic tattoo as I reached out, my fingers grazing the fabric of her coat to confirm she was indeed tangible. Her skin was cold beneath my touch, but she responded to my grip, stepping over the threshold as if she belonged there, as if 3 years hadn't passed. I stumbled back, overwhelmed by a flood of emotions, relief, confusion, and a trepidation I couldn't quite place. Questions tumbled from my lips, each one met with silence as Margaret remained mute, her gaze fixed somewhere beyond the physical world. The realization that something was amiss seeped into my consciousness, but I pushed it aside, desperate to hold onto the miracle standing before me. Over the following days, I tried to piece together the fragments of her disappearance. Her silence was unnerving, but every now and then she'd respond with a slight nod or shake of her head, fueling my resolve to reclaim our lost life. The town buzzed with disbelief, their whispers a backdrop to our cautiously reconstructed routine. Yet, The more I tried to coax her into familiarity, the more the creeping unease tiptoed through the recesses of my mind. The first night after her return, sleep eluded me. I lay awake, listening to the rain's gentle patter against the roof, the rhythm a deceptive lullaby. Across the hall, Margaret's room was dark, yet I could sense her presence, like an echo of past memories that refused to fade. At some point, exhaustion claimed me, but an unsettling dream snared my consciousness. In it, shadows writhed within the house, their shapes indistinct yet oppressive. They whispered secrets in a language I couldn't comprehend, but their intentions were unmistakably malevolent. Margaret stood amidst them, her features obscured by the darkness, reaching out to me with a beseeching gesture. I jolted awake, my heart thundering in my chest, the remnants of the dream clinging to my senses like cobwebs. As the days turned into weeks, Margaret's presence became a peculiar blend of solace and disquiet. She shadowed me through the house, her silent companionship a constant reminder of the inexplicable. The townsfolk, though initially thrilled by her return, began to withdraw, their excitement tempered by the unsettling aura that clung to her like an invisible cloak. It was a late afternoon when the first real disturbance shattered the fragile normalcy I'd tried to cultivate. I was rummaging through the attic, searching for an old photo album I'd neglected in my attempts to move forward. The shadows stretched across the floor, merging with the stacks of forgotten memories. As I flipped through the album, a chill brushed against my skin, raising goosebumps along my arms. One photograph fell from the pages, a candid shot of Margaret taken just weeks before she vanished. Her expression was one of unrestrained joy, her eyes bright and alive. My gaze shifted to the figure standing in the corner, half shrouded by the attic's gloom. Margaret was there, watching me, her silhouette eerily still, as if she were more shadow than flesh. "Margaret?" I called, my voice a whisper swallowed by the oppressive silence. Her eyes met mine, and for a brief moment, I saw the flicker of something, the ghost of an emotion, perhaps. But then it was gone, replaced by the same unsettling detachment that had marked her return. The photograph trembled in my hands, the weight of its revelation heavy in my mind. I returned it to the album and closed it with a decisive snap, the sound echoing through the attic. Margaret stepped forward, her movements fluid and graceful, yet her presence felt spectral, as if she were a manifestation of my deepest fears. "I miss you," she said suddenly, her voice a soft, ethereal murmur that sent a shiver down my spine. The words were a plea and a promise intertwined, as if she grappled with the boundary between existence and oblivion. My heart swelled with anguish, for the daughter I'd known seemed to exist only in memory, replaced by this enigmatic being who wore her face, but not her spirit. The escalation of unease reached a crescendo a week later. Margaret's behavior, once merely peculiar, now bordered on the uncanny. She never seemed to eat, yet she remained robust. Her skin, though pale, exhibited an unnatural resilience. I found myself questioning her reality, the edges of her presence blurring into an unsettling ambiguity. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting orange-hued shadows through the living room, I confronted her. "Margaret, please. I need to know where you've been, what happened to you." My voice was both a plea and a demand, the desperation undeniable. She turned to me, her eyes reflecting the dying light. "I was lost," she whispered, her words an echo of the torment I could only imagine she endured. "But I found my way back." "How?" I pressed, the question a tangible thread between us, fraying with the weight of uncertainty. Her gaze drifted, her expression unreadable. "The woods," she replied cryptically. "They showed me the way." The revelation was both illuminating and terrifying. Our town was cradled by the woods, the dark, ancient forest that bordered our lives. Tales of its mysterious nature had been woven into the fabric of our community, old wives' tales whispered from one generation to the next. Yet, to hear it from her lips was to give form to the formless, to breathe life into the myths that had long dwelled on the edges of reality. Determined to understand, I resolved to visit the woods, to seek the answers that eluded me. I wanted to believe that the forest held the key to restoring Margaret, the vibrant child I'd lost. But as I stood at the threshold of the towering trees, the fading light casting elongated shadows, doubt not at my conviction. The woods were alive with whispers, the rustling leaves a chorus of secrets long entombed. I ventured deeper, the path winding beneath the canopy, casting a twilight gloom upon my senses. The air was thick with an otherworldly presence, and every instinct screamed at me to turn back. Yet, the hope of finding answers propelled me forward. Amidst the trees, I stumbled upon a clearing bathed in an ethereal glow. The atmosphere shimmered with an energy both ancient and potent. In the center stood Margaret, her form illuminated by the spectral light. She turned to me, her eyes reflecting the luminescence, and in that moment, I understood. This place, she intoned, her voice a gentle cadence woven with the fabric of the forest. It's where the lost find their way. I was taken, but they brought me back. Who? I implored, my voice tremulous with fear and awe. The forgotten, she replied enigmatically, her expression serene yet distant. They seek reparation for the wrongs done to them. An understanding dawned, an unsettling truth that burrowed into the depths of my soul. The forest, ancient and sentient, was more than mere foliage and fauna. It harbored those who had been wronged, those who sought justice from beyond the veil. Margaret, my daughter, was both a messenger and a revenant, her return a manifestation of the forest's will. The revelation left me reeling, my heart a tumult of emotions, grief, fear, and a strange comfort woven into an intricate tapestry. Margaret stepped forward, her expression softening, and in her eyes I glimpsed the girl I'd lost, the daughter of my heart. I'm here, Dad, she murmured, reaching out to bridge the chasm that separated us. Her touch was electric, a jolt of warmth that suffused my being. I won't leave again. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows that danced at the periphery of my vision. The forest receded, its presence a lingering echo, and as I followed Margaret back to the path, I felt the weight of the unseen settle upon me. The woods, their secrets intact, faded into the twilight, leaving behind an understanding that was both comforting and disquieting. In the days that followed, Margaret and I began to weave a new pattern into the fabric of our lives, a routine both familiar and foreign. The town, though cautious, embraced her return, their whispers transforming from speculation to acceptance. Yet, the memory of the forest lingered, a spectral presence that underscored our reality. Margaret, though still and silent at times, exuded a strength born of her journey, and in her eyes, I saw the glimmer of a future uncharted yet promising. The woods, ancient sentinels at the edge of our existence, watched over us with their indomitable gaze, their whispers a reminder of the mysteries that lay beyond our understanding. And so, we continued, father and daughter, bound by the threads of the past and the promise of the unknown. The fear, though ever present, was tempered by hope, and in that fragile balance, we found our semblance of peace. There is a peculiar stillness that only surfaces in small towns after the sun dips below the horizon, leaving the world cloaked in a gentle, comforting embrace of twilight. The street lamps flicker on one by one, casting golden pools of light on the cracked pavement, while the wind whispers through the leaves of the elm trees lining the streets. It was under this dome of quietude, in the sleepy suburb of Maplewood, that life ambled forward with the predictability of a well-rehearsed play. My life had settled into a rhythm since that fateful day 3 years ago when my world was irrevocably altered. My daughter, Emily, had simply vanished. One moment she was there, her laughter echoing through the house. The next, she was gone, leaving only her absence to fill the spaces she used to occupy. The police had searched, the community had rallied, but after months of fruitless searching, all that was left was the echo of unanswered questions. The house had grown quiet, too quiet. In those years, I had learned to navigate through life with a semblance of normalcy, though my heart carried the weight of her absence like a stone. I still set a place for her at the table, a silent vigil of hope that one day she might return. Friends would give me the look, the one that pitied my clinging to hope. But hope was all I had. That night, the night that would unravel the thin fabric of my carefully reconstructed world, began like any other. I sat in the living room, the television casting a dull glow across the room. The sound was muted, the images a blur of motion as my mind drifted elsewhere. The clock ticked steadily, a comforting metronome in the quietude of the house. Then came the knock, a soft, hesitant sound that echoed through the silence like the tolling of a distant bell. I hesitated, the moment stretching into a fragile eternity. Visitors were rare, especially at this hour. Finally, I rose, a small knot of anxiety unfurling in my chest as I approached the door. The porch light flickered uncertainly as I reached for the doorknob, my hand trembling ever so slightly. When I opened the door, the world seemed to shift, as though reality itself had momentarily faltered. Standing there, in the gentle spill of light, was Emily. Her hair was longer than I remembered, her face a little older, but it was her. She looked up at me with those familiar eyes, a ghost of a smile playing at her lips. "Dad?" she said, her voice a fragile whisper, as though speaking too loudly might shatter the moment. My heart leaped and stumbled in my chest, a cacophony of emotions crashing over me. Disbelief, joy, fear. I pulled her into my arms, feeling her solid form, and yet there was something strange, something just beneath the surface that I couldn't quite grasp. "Emily," I breathed, tears prickling at the corners of my eyes. I thought, I thought I'd lost you." She pulled back slightly, her eyes meeting mine with an intensity that sent a shiver down my spine. "I was lost," she replied, her voice carrying an undercurrent of something I couldn't place. We sat in the living room, the silence between us punctuated by the rhythmic ticking of the clock. She told me little of where she had been, only that she had been taken, but there was a strange detachment in her tone, a rehearsed quality to her words. Questions buzzed around my mind like insistent mosquitoes, but I was too overwhelmed to give them voice. The town buzzed with the news of Emily's return. Neighbors dropped by, their expressions a mix of awe and unease. For a moment, it seemed as though life might finally return to the way it had been. But beneath the surface, a dissonance was brewing, a quiet discord that vibrated through the air. Days passed, and I began to notice things, small things at first. Emily's aversion to the sunlight, the way she would disappear for hours, returning with no explanation. She moved through the house like a shadow, a specter that was both there and not there. Conversations with her felt stilted, as if she were reciting lines in a play. Her responses just a hair out of sync with reality, but it was her eyes that disturbed me most. They held a depth, a knowing that belied her years, as if she had seen things no one should ever see. Sometimes I would catch her staring at me with an intensity that seemed to bore into my very soul, as if she could see through the flesh and bone to something deeper, something hidden. One night, I awoke to find her standing at the foot of my bed, her silhouette a dark outline against the pale glow of the moonlight filtering through the curtains. Her presence was unsettling, a cold draft seemed to emanate from her. "Emily?" I murmured, my voice thick with sleep and confusion. She didn't respond for a long moment, and the silence stretched taut between us. Then, in a voice that was almost a whisper, she said, "Do you remember, Dad? Do you remember what you did?" A chill ran through me, my heart thudding in my chest like a drum. I sat up, trying to make sense of her words. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice trembling. She turned and left the room, disappearing into the shadows. I was left with my thoughts, a creeping unease settling over me like a second skin. Her words echoed in my mind, a haunting refrain that lingered long after she had gone. The days blurred into one another, each one a mirror of the last, yet with each passing day, the tension in the air grew more pronounced. I began to have dreams, strange and disjointed, filled with images of a dark forest, the sound of rushing water, and Emily's voice calling from somewhere far away. It was on a particularly stormy night that the truth began to unravel. Lightning flashed, illuminating the room in stark relief as I sifted through old photos, searching for some semblance of the past that might provide clarity. There was one photo, taken only weeks before Emily disappeared, that caught my eye. It was a family picnic by the river, a day that seemed ordinary but now held a sinister undertone. As I stared at the photo, a memory bubbled up from the depths of my subconscious, something I had buried deep. It was a moment, a fleeting second of anger, of frustration. I remembered shouting, Emily's tear-streaked face, and the river, always the river. The realization hit me like a physical blow. The river had taken her, or so I had convinced myself. But now, staring at the photo, at Emily's eyes, I couldn't escape the truth. I had pushed her, not intending harm, just a thoughtless act of frustration, a culmination of stress and exhaustion. The river had done the rest. I sat there, the weight of my guilt pressing down on me as the storm raged outside. And then there was Emily, standing in the doorway, watching me with those knowing eyes. You remember now, don't you? She asked, her voice carrying the weight of the grave. I nodded, unable to speak, the words caught in my throat. She stepped closer, the air around her charged with something electric, something otherworldly. I'm here to help you remember, she said, and there was a flicker of something in her expression, something that might have been compassion or perhaps pity. The lights flickered, the storm outside reaching its crescendo. Emily raised her hand, and in it, I saw a small object glinting dully in the dim light. It was her locket, the one she had been wearing that day at the river. She held it out to me, and as I took it, a flood of memories washed over me, drowning me in their tide. I remembered everything. The argument, the shove, the moment she disappeared beneath the water's surface. It all came crashing back, a vivid tableau painted in shades of regret and sorrow. Emily watched me, her expression inscrutable. There are places, Dad, she said softly, places between this world and the next where things don't quite work the way they should. I've been there. Her words sent a shiver down my spine, a primal fear clawing its way to the surface. What are you? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. She smiled, a sad, knowing smile. I am what you made me, what the river made me, but I'm still your daughter. The storm outside abated, leaving a quiet that was almost palpable. Emily turned away, her figure fading into the shadows. I reached out instinctively, my fingers brushing against empty air. Will I see you again? I called after her, desperation lacing my voice. She paused, her silhouette a ghostly presence at the edge of the room. Perhaps, she replied enigmatically. But for now, you must live with what you've remembered. And then she was gone, leaving only the echoes of her presence lingering in the air, a haunting reminder of the past that could not be undone. Days turned into weeks, and life in Maplewood resumed its quiet cadence. But the world felt changed, as if the colors had faded ever so slightly, leaving everything tinged with a pale, muted hue. I carried the memory of Emily, of her spectral return, like a shadow that stretched long in the fading light of dusk. I no longer set a place for her at the table, for she was with me always, in the creak of the floorboards, the rustle of the leaves outside, and the whispering of the river that had once claimed her. She was a constant presence, a reminder of my guilt, my loss, and the thin line that separated this world from whatever lay beyond. The townsfolk spoke of Emily's return with hushed reverence, their glances a mix of curiosity and fear. Rumors swirled like autumn leaves caught in a gust of wind, tales of ghosts and spirits that walked among us, their stories entwined with the living. But no one spoke of what lay beneath the surface, the dark currents that twisted unseen, shaping our lives in ways we could scarcely comprehend. In the stillness of night, when the world was quiet, I would sit by the river's edge, listening to its murmur, recalling the day it had claimed Emily and the day it had brought her back. The water held its secrets well, its depths unfathomable, its surface a mirror that reflected the changing sky. I would linger there, seeking solace in its eternal flow, wondering if, somewhere in its depths, Emily's spirit still danced, caught between two worlds. And so, I lived with the memory of her return, with the knowledge of what I had done, and the understanding that some things could never be undone. She had come back to remind me, to make me remember, and though her presence had faded, her impact remained, woven into the fabric of my being. Maplewood continued to sleep beneath its canopy of stars, its streets quiet, its people unaware of the whispers that drifted through the night. But I knew, as I stood by the river, that the past was never truly gone, only waiting, like Emily, to return when least expected. The early morning sun filtered through the lace curtains, casting intricate patterns on the wooden floor of my kitchen. I sipped my coffee and gazed out the window at the quiet suburb where I had spent the past 2 decades of my life. The streets were calm, the gardens well tended, each house a mirror of the other with its brick facade and neatly trimmed hedges. It was a picturesque setting, belying the turmoil that had gripped my heart for the past 3 years. 3 years since my daughter, Emily, had vanished without a trace. The pain had dulled over time, as pain often does, but it still lingered like a phantom ache. Every day, I hoped for a miracle, yet with each passing day, the hope grew fainter, replaced by a resigned acceptance of the unknown. I had gone through the motions of life, mechanically, as if on autopilot. Work, eat, sleep, repeat. The house was too quiet, too empty, without the sound of her laughter. I filled my days with routine, allowing myself to forget, if only for a moment, the gaping hole left by her absence. That morning was like any other, the same monotonous ritual of coffee and silence. I was contemplating whether to mow the lawn before the afternoon sun made it unbearable when there was a knock at the door. A light, tentative tapping, almost hesitant. My heart skipped a beat, a reflexive reaction to the unexpected. I set my mug down and walked to the door, my mind running through the usual possibilities. A neighbor, perhaps, or the mail carrier. When I opened the door, the world stopped. Standing on the porch was Emily. Her face was exactly as I remembered, soft features, auburn hair cascading over her shoulders, and eyes that glimmered with a knowing light. She wore the same blue hoodie she had worn the day she disappeared, faded jeans, and the old Converse sneakers she loved. It was as if time had folded in on itself, erasing the lost years and presenting her to me as she had been on that day. "Dad?" she said, her voice a whisper, tinged with a tremor of uncertainty. I reached out, my hand trembling, and touched her shoulder. She was solid, real, not a figment of my grief-stricken imagination. A sob choked my throat, and I pulled her to me, enveloping her in a hug that spoke the words I couldn't find. Her body was warm, her breath a gentle caress against my neck. "Emily," I murmured, relishing the feel of her name on my tongue. "Emily." Reluctantly, I released her, holding her at arm's length, drinking in every detail of her face. "Where have you been? What happened?" She looked down, her expression clouded with something I couldn't quite place. "I don't remember much, Dad. It's like I was asleep all this time." The explanation was unsatisfactory, but the need for answers was eclipsed by the overwhelming joy of her return. I led her inside, my mind a whirl of disbelief and elation. She sat at the kitchen table, and I fussed over her, offering food, drink, anything she might need. She accepted a glass of water, sipping it slowly, her eyes scanning the room as if trying to recognize the familiar. As she settled in, I couldn't help but notice the subtle changes in her demeanor. There was a gravity to her movements that hadn't been there before, a depth to her gaze that seemed to hold secrets beyond her years. I pushed the thought aside, attributing it to the ordeal she must have endured. In the following days, a semblance of normalcy returned. Emily was here, and that was all that mattered. We drove to the police station to report her return, and though the officers were incredulous, they took her statement, promising to reopen her case. The neighbors, too, were astounded, their whispered conversations trailing us as we walked through the streets. Yet, despite the outward calm, an undercurrent of something sinister began to unfurl in the quiet of our home. It started with the small things, barely noticeable at first. Items would be misplaced or vanish, only to reappear in the exact spot I had searched dozens of times. Lights flickered inexplicably, the shadows they cast stretching into strange shapes that seemed to dance to an unheard rhythm. Emily, too, seemed different. She would often retreat to her room for hours, the door shut tight, emerging only for meals or when I called her. Her sleep was plagued by nightmares, muffled cries echoing through the walls. and though I tried to comfort her, she would only shake her head, telling me it was nothing. One evening, as we sat together in the living room, I noticed her staring at the photograph on the mantelpiece. It was an old family photo, taken a year before her disappearance. Her gaze was fixated on it, her eyes unblinking. "Emily?" I ventured, breaking the silence. She blinked, as if waking from a trance, and looked at me. "That photo. It feels like a lifetime ago." "It does," I agreed, trying to keep my voice light. "But we're together now. That's what matters." She nodded, but the unease lingered, a shadow behind her eyes. The strange occurrences grew more frequent, more intense. There were nights when I would hear her speaking in low tones, her voice barely audible through the walls. When I asked her about it, she claimed she was practicing a speech for school, though she never elaborated further. Then came the night when everything changed. I awoke to the sound of whispering. The clock read 3:15 a.m., and the house was steeped in an unnatural silence, broken only by the murmured words. I followed the sound, my bare feet silent on the hardwood floor, leading me to Emily's room. The door was ajar, and through the gap, I could see her sitting in the middle of the room. Candles were arranged in a circle around her, their flames casting flickering shadows that twisted across the walls. Her eyes were closed, her lips moving in a rhythmic chant that sent shivers down my spine. "Emily," I called softly, stepping into the room. Her eyes snapped open, and for a moment, they were not the eyes of my daughter. They were dark, unfathomable, filled with an ancient power that made my skin crawl. Then, just as quickly, the moment passed, and she was Emily again, her expression one of guilt and fear. "What's going on?" I demanded, my voice a harsh whisper in the stillness. She rose to her feet, extinguishing the candles with a wave of her hand. "I didn't want you to see this," she said, her voice small. "See what? What are you doing, Emily?" "I was trying to remember," she replied, a tear trailing down her cheek. "Trying to understand what happened to me." There was a desperation in her words that tugged at my heart. I wanted to believe her, to protect her from whatever darkness had touched her life. Yet, a seed of doubt had been planted, and it grew with each passing day. As the days turned to weeks, my dreams became haunted by visions of Emily. I would see her standing at the edge of a dark forest, her face obscured by shadows, beckoning to me with outstretched arms. I would wake, drenched in sweat. The image burned into my mind. Emily continued her nocturnal rituals, and though I spoke to her about it, she dismissed my concerns, insisting it was harmless. But I knew deep down that something was terribly wrong. There was a malevolence that clung to her, an aura that seemed to suffocate the air around us. One night, as I lay in bed, I heard a sound that chilled me to the core. It was a low, mournful wail, a sound I had hoped never to hear again. It was the sound of Emily's cry when she was a baby, a sound I had memorized through countless sleepless nights. But this was different, distorted, echoing with an otherworldly resonance. I bolted upright, heart pounding, and rushed to her room. The door was locked, and my frantic knocking went unanswered. Desperate, I forced it open, the door crashing against the wall. Emily sat in the center of the room, the candles illuminating her from all sides. Her head was tilted back, eyes closed, lips moving in silent incantation. The wail had ceased, replaced by a suffocating silence that pressed against my chest. "Emily," I shouted, crossing the threshold, reaching for her. Her eyes snapped open, and the transformation was complete. Her face was contorted with rage, her voice a guttural snarl as she spoke words I could not understand. The candles flared, their flames reaching towards the ceiling, casting grotesque shadows that seemed to writhe and twist with a life of their own. I stumbled back, fear gripping my heart as the room seemed to spin, the walls closing in. Emily's voice rose in a crescendo, a terrible cacophony that pierced my mind. Then, darkness swallowed me whole. When I awoke, I was lying on the floor, the room bathed in the soft glow of dawn. The candles were gone, and the air was filled with the scent of burnt wax. Emily stood over me, her expression calm, though her eyes betrayed the turmoil within. "What happened?" I croaked, pushing myself into a sitting position. I had to stop it, she said, her voice steady. I had to end it. End what? She knelt beside me, a weariness etched into her features. The spirit that followed me back. It wanted. It wanted revenge for something I can't remember. But it's gone now. I sent it away. The explanation was as bewildering as the events that had transpired, yet there was a conviction in her words that left no room for doubt. I wanted to ask more, to understand, but the exhaustion in her eyes silenced me. We sat together in the growing light, the only sound the distant chirping of birds heralding a new day. In the following weeks, the disturbances ceased. Life settled into a new rhythm, a fragile peace that we both clung to. Emily seemed lighter, as if a weight had been lifted from her shoulders, though the shadows of our ordeal lingered in the corners of my mind. The town moved on, the whispers fading as quickly as they had begun. Yet, deep down, I knew that the past would never truly leave us. It was a part of us now, woven into the fabric of our lives, an indelible mark that would remain long after the memories had faded. Though Emily was back, the fear lingered, an unspoken fear of what might return, of what lay beyond the veil of the familiar. It was a fear that I learned to live with, just as I lived with the joy of having my daughter home. And so, life continued in our small suburb, each day a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the enduring mysteries that lay hidden in the shadows. Life in our small town suburb had always been quiet, almost too quiet, like the gentle hum of an air conditioner that you only notice when it stops. This was the kind of place where people left their doors unlocked, where neighbors knew each other's names, each other's business, even, and where the rhythm of life was as predictable as the seasons. My life, too, adhered to this tranquil rhythm until the day everything changed. 3 years ago, I lost my daughter, Emily. She was only 12, with laughter that could fill a room and a smile so infectious that even the most stoic among us couldn't help but be charmed. The day she went missing, it was as if the world had shifted on its axis. The sky seemed a shade darker, the air heavier, and the silence that followed was deafening. Despite exhaustive searches and the involvement of the police, Emily was nowhere to be found. Eventually, the town moved on, as towns do. But for me, time stood still. Her room remained untouched, her clothes still folded in the drawers, and her favorite stuffed bear sat forever waiting on her pillow. One evening, as autumn leaves fluttered like whispers against the fading light, there was a knock at my door. I remember it so vividly, a sound so ordinary yet it sliced through the evening stillness, jolting me from my memories. I opened the door, and there she was, Emily. Her hair was a little longer, and there was a maturity in her eyes that seemed out of place. But it was her. My heart leapt, tears streamed down my face as I pulled her into my arms. Relief washed over me, a tidal wave that carried away 3 years of grief in an instant. But from that moment, something was different. Emily was different. Her demeanor was calm, too calm, as though she were merely an observer in her own life. Her laughter, once a constant melody, was now subdued, and she spoke with a precision that was unfamiliar. At first, I attributed these changes to the trauma of whatever she had experienced. I told myself that with time, she'd be my Emily again. Then came the first disturbance. Late one night, I awoke to a sound, a faint humming, barely audible over the rustle of the trees outside. I followed the noise through the darkened hallway to Emily's room. She was sitting on her bed, eyes closed, her lips moving as if reciting a forgotten verse. Emily? I whispered. Her eyes snapped open, and for a brief moment, her gaze was not her own. It was wide, ancient, filled with a depth I could not fathom. Then, as quickly as it came, it was gone, replaced by the familiar warmth I remembered. She smiled, sleepily, as if waking from a dream, and lay back down without a word. Days passed, and I watched her closely, trying to understand what had happened to my little girl. My mind, desperate for answers, wandered through possibilities. Was it amnesia? A dissociative fugue? Had she been taken, brainwashed, and somehow escaped? Yet, none of these explanations fit the unease that crawled beneath my skin. The escalation came slowly, like a creeping shadow as the sun sets. I began to notice strange occurrences around the house. Objects moved inexplicably from one room to another. Doors that were left closed stood ajar. At first, I brushed them off as absent-mindedness on my part. But then there were those whispers, soft like the wind through the leaves, but distinctly human, echoing in the silence of the night. The tipping point arrived one evening as I sat alone in the living room, the television murmuring in the background. Emily had gone to bed early, claiming she was tired after a day at school. I was reviewing some paperwork for my job when I felt it, a chill that prickled my skin. The lights flickered, and the room seemed to darken, the shadows deepening in the corners. I rose to check the circuit breaker when I heard it, a voice clear and resonant, calling my name from the depths of the house. Mom. It was Emily's voice, yet it carried an echo, a resonance that didn't belong. I hurried to her room, my heart pounding against my ribs. Her door creaked open at my touch. The room was shrouded in darkness, except for a sliver of moonlight cutting across the floor. Emily was sitting on the edge of her bed, her back to me, staring out the window. But there was something else, a presence I could feel but not see, a weight in the air that pressed against my chest. Emily? I called out, my voice trembling. She turned to face me, and the room seemed to hold its breath. Her eyes were different, darker, filled with shadows and secrets. She spoke in a voice that was both hers and not hers, layered with an ethereal quality that sent a shiver down my spine. She can't come back, Emily said, her lips barely moving. What do you mean? I asked, stepping closer, though every instinct screamed at me to run. She can't come back, Emily repeated, and this time there was a flicker of something behind her eyes. Fear, defiance. They won't let her. Who won't let her? Emily, what happened to you? Silence hung heavy in the room, a chasm filled with unspoken truths. Then, Emily's face softened, the shadows retreating, and she blinked, as if waking from a trance. I'm tired, Mom, she said quietly, lying back down. I watched her sleep, torn between relief and a growing sense of dread. I wanted to believe this was my daughter, the same girl who loved to dance in the kitchen and laugh at silly jokes, but something was fundamentally altered. It was in the way she moved, the way she spoke, and in the spaces between her words. The climax arrived with the inevitability of a gathering storm. It was another quiet night, the kind that used to bring comfort. I was in bed, tossing and turning when the temperature in the room dropped suddenly, my breath escaping invisible puffs. The shadows that danced across the ceiling seemed to coil, reaching toward the corners of my mind where fear lay dormant. The whispers returned, louder, more insistent, filling the air with a cacophony of voices that overlapped one another. I could hear my own heartbeat, a drumbeat of panic, as I pushed back the covers and forced myself to leave the safety of my bed. The hallway stretched before me, longer than it had ever seemed, the walls closing in like the maw of some great beast. I reached Emily's door, my hand trembling as I turned the knob. The room was a vortex of shadows swirling around a small figure sitting cross-legged on the floor. Emily, or what I hoped was Emily, looked up, her eyes gleaming with a light that was not of this world. They're here, she said, and her voice was a symphony, the overlapping tones creating a harmony that was both beautiful and terrible. Who are they? I asked, my voice barely a whisper against the roar of the unseen force that filled the room. They want what was taken, she replied, her hands reaching out, fingers curling in the air, as if grasping at something only she could see. What do they want, Emily? Tell me how to help you. But there were no answers, only the rising crescendo of the voices that enveloped me, each one pulling at the fabric of my sanity. I could feel them, the presence of something ancient, something that had once been human, but was now transformed by time and circumstance. In that moment, as I stood on the precipice of understanding and madness, I made a choice. I stepped forward, reaching out to my daughter, my heart aching with the love I had always held for her. Her fingers brushed against mine, and in that touch, I felt everything, the pain, the loss, the desperate longing for release. The room exploded in a blinding light, a brilliance so intense that it seared into my mind, leaving nothing but white-hot clarity. And then it was over. I was alone, the shadows receding, the voices fading into the ether from whence they came. Emily lay on the floor, unconscious but breathing, her face finally at peace. I gathered her in my arms, my tears falling freely as I whispered promises of safety, of love, of a future untainted by past horrors. In the days that followed, the house returned to its normal state, as if the events of those nights had been nothing more than a fevered dream. Emily awoke with no memory of what had transpired, her eyes once more the eyes of my daughter, clear and bright. Yet the fear lingered, a shadow that hovered at the edge of my vision. I knew now that the world was a far stranger place than I had ever imagined, filled with unseen forces that moved in the spaces between light and dark. And though Emily was returned to me, whole and unharmed, I could not shake the feeling that we had merely glimpsed the surface of something vast and unknowable. The nights grew long again, the sky heavy with stars that seemed to watch with a knowing gaze. And as I tucked Emily into bed each evening, I would linger at her door, listening for those whispers, for the echo of voices that might return. The fear was no longer paralyzing, but a constant companion, reminding me of the fragility of the line between this world and whatever lay beyond. I had my daughter back, and for that, I was grateful beyond words. But the experience had marked us both, a reminder of the thin veil that separates our reality from the mysteries that lie in wait. And so, I lived in acceptance, with love tempered by awareness, knowing that at any moment, the ordinary could give way to the extraordinary, and that the past could reach out to claim us once more.